Once by the Pacific by Robert Frost. Coffee Break Collection 25. Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by T.J. Burns. Once by the Pacific. The shattered water made a misty din. Great waves looked over others coming in, and thought of doing something to the shore that water never did to land before. The clouds were low and hairy in the skies, like locks blown forward in the gleam of eyes. You could not tell, and yet it looked as if the shore was lucky in being backed by cliff, the cliff in being backed by continent. It looked as if a night of dark intent was coming, and not only a night, an age. Someone had better be prepared for rage. There would be more than ocean water broken before God's last "put out the light" was spoken. End of Once by the Pacific. Recording by T.J. Burns.
Over Niagara in a Barrel by Anonymous. Coffee Break Collection 25. Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anita Sloma Martinez. Over Niagara in a Barrel. Remarkable feat of a woman who escaped serious injury. Mrs. Anna Edson Taylor of Bay City, Michigan, celebrated her 43rd birthday by making a successful trip over Niagara Falls in a barrel. She is the first person to attempt such a performance, and the thousands who witnessed the performance were amazed at the manner in which the barrel plunged over reef after reef in the upper rapids, rushing with the current toward the famous waterfall. Regarding the feat, Mrs. Taylor afterwards said, "I would sooner walk up to the mouth of a cannon, knowing that it was going to blow me to pieces, than to make another trip over the falls. I made it voluntarily, but I would not do it again for $1 million." The barrel in which Mrs. Taylor accomplished the feat was about 6 feet long. Attached to the bottom were heavy weights to hold it upright. Within the barrel were straps attached to the bottom, which were placed over the woman's shoulders to prevent her head from bumping against the top. Over her head, during the trip, was a pillow for further protection. On the memorable day, Mrs. Taylor and her barrel were rowed into the upper river and set adrift in a current that rapidly bore her toward the rapids. Striking the first incline of water in the rapids, the barrel took an upright position and, bobbing like a cork, moved straight for the curve of the Horseshoe Falls. A little to the Canadian side of the center of the falls, the barrel took its plunge and dropped, clouded in mist, to the lower river, a distance of 158 feet. When the desperate plunge was being taken, thousands of spectators held their breath in anxiety and suspense, everyone believing that the fall would be fatal and that another would be added to the long list of the victims of Niagara. 2 minutes after the plunging barrel had been lost in the mist of the tremendous cataract, it appeared in the seething white water below the falls. It gradually was carried by the current to the Canadian side and was hauled ashore. The top was hastily sawed off, and Mrs. Taylor was taken out. She had suffered a contusion on the right side of the head and had received numerous bruises on the body. Her nervous system had suffered a severe shock, and since then she has been afflicted with severe headaches. Exactly 50 minutes had elapsed from the time she was sent adrift until she was released from the barrel. When she reached her hotel, she broke down and wept. When she was rescued, the barrel was 1/3 filled with water. The tremendous pressure had forced the water through the air tube which connected with the small opening near the top of the barrel. Mrs. Taylor is a native of Auburn, New York. She is a graduate of the State Normal School at Albany and has taught school in Texas and more recently at Bay City, Michigan. She owns a ranch in Texas and it was with the view of making money by exhibiting herself and her barrel and lifting a mortgage on the ranch that she made her perilous trip through Niagara Rapids. End of Over Niagara in a Barrel.
The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Parts 1 through 4 of 7, by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Coffee Break Collection 25, Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in November 2019. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Part the First. It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three, by thy long grey beard and glittering eye. Now wherefore stoppest thou me? The bridegroom's doors are opened wide, and I am next of kin. The guests are met, the feast is set, mayst hear the merry din. He holds him with his skinny hand. There was a ship, quoth he. Hold off, unhand me, grey-beard loon. Eftsoons his hand dropped he. He holds me with his glittering eye. The wedding guest stood still, and listens like a 3 years' child. The mariner hath his will. The wedding guest sat on a stone. He cannot choose but hear. And thus spake on that ancient man, the bright-eyed marinere. The ship was cheered, the harbour cleared, merrily did we drop, below the kirk, below the hill, below the lighthouse top. The sun came up upon the left, out of the sea came he, and he shone bright, and on the right went down into the sea. Higher and higher every day, till over the mast at noon. The wedding guest here beat his breast, for he heard the loud bassoon. The bride hath paced into the hall, red as a rose is she, nodding their heads before her goes the merry minstrelsy. The wedding guest he beat his breast, yet he cannot choose but hear, and thus spake on that ancient man, the bright-eyed marinere. And now the storm blast came, and he was tyrannous and strong. He struck with his o'ertaking wings, and chased south along. With sloping masts and dipping prow, as who pursued with yell and blow, still treads the shadow of his foe, and forward bends his head. The ship drove fast, loud roared the blast, and southward aye we fled. And now there came both mist and snow, and it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high came floating by, as green as emerald. And through the drifts and snowy cliffs did send a dismal sheen, nor shapes of men nor beasts we ken, the ice was all between. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled, like noises in a swound. At length did cross an albatross. Through the fog it came, as if it had been a Christian soul. We hailed it in God's name. It ate the food it ne'er had eat, and round it flew. The ice did split with a thunder fit, the helmsman steered us through. And a good south wind sprung up behind, and the albatross did follow. And every day for food or play came to the mariner's halloo. In mist or cloud, on mast or shroud, it perched for vespers 9, whiles all the night through fog smoke white glimmered the white moonshine. God save thee, ancient mariner, from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why look'st thou so? With my crossbow I shot the albatross. Part the Second. The sun now rose upon the right, out of the sea came he, still hid in mist, and on the left went down into the sea. And the good south wind still blew behind, but no sweet bird did follow, nor any day for food or play came to the mariner's halloo. And I had done an hellish thing, and it would work 'em woe. For all averred I had killed the bird that made the breeze to blow. Ah, wretch, said they, the bird to slay that made the breeze to blow. Nor dim nor red like God's own head the glorious sun uprist. Then all averred I had killed the bird that brought the fog and mist. 'Twas right, said they, such birds to slay that bring the fog and mist. The fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. We were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. Down dropped the breeze, the sails dropped down. 'Twas sad as sad could be, and we did speak only to break the silence of the sea. All in a hot and copper sky, the bloody sun at noon, right up above the mast did stand, no bigger than the moon. Day after day, day after day, we stuck, nor breath nor motion, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. Water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. The very deep did rot. O Christ, that ever this should be! Yea, slimy things did crawl with legs upon the slimy sea. About, about, in reel and rout, the death fires danced at night. The water, like a witch's oils, burnt green and blue and white. And some in dreams assured were of the spirit that plagued us so. 9 fathom deep he had followed us from the land of mist and snow. And every tongue through utter drought was withered at the root. We could not speak no more than if we had been choked with soot. Ah, well a day, what evil looks had I from old and young. Instead of the cross, the albatross about my neck was hung. Part the third. There passed a weary time. Each throat was parched and glazed each eye. A weary time, a weary time. How glazed each weary eye, when looking westward I beheld a something in the sky. At first it seemed a little speck, and then it seemed a mist. It moved and took at last a certain shape, I wist. A speck, a mist, a shape, I wist. And still it neared and neared, as if it dodged a water sprite. It plunged and tacked and veered. With throats unslaked, with black lips baked, we could not laugh nor wail. Through utter drought all dumb we stood. I bit my arm, I sucked the blood, and cried, "A sail, a sail!" With throats unslaked, with black lips baked, agape they heard me call. Gramercy they for joy did grin, and all at once their breath drew in, as they were drinking all. "See, see," I cried, "she tacks no more, hither to work us weal. Without a breeze, without a tide, she steadies with upright keel." The western wave was all aflame, the day was well nigh done. Almost upon the western wave rested the broad bright sun, when that strange shape drove suddenly betwixt us and the sun. And straight the sun was flecked with bars. Heaven's mother send us grace! As if through a dungeon grate he peered, with broad and burning face. Alas, thought I, and my heart beat loud, how fast she nears and nears! Are those her sails that glance in the sun like restless gossameres? Are those her ribs through which the sun did peer, as through a grate? And is that woman all her crew? Is that a death? And are there two? Is death that woman's mate? Her lips were red, her looks were free, her locks were yellow as gold, her skin was as white as leprosy. The nightmare life in death was she, who thicks man's blood with cold. The naked hulk alongside came, and the twain were casting dice. "The game is done, I've won, quoth she, and whistles thrice. The sun's rim dips, the stars rush out. At one stride comes the dark. With far-heard whisper o'er the sea, off shot the spectre bark. We listened and looked sideways up, fear at my heart, as at a cup my life-blood seemed to sip. The stars were dim and thick the night, the steersman's face by his lamp gleamed white. From the sails the dew did drip, till clomb over the eastern bar the horned moon with one bright star within the nether tip. One after one by the star-dogged moon, too quick for groan or sigh, each turned his face with a ghastly pang and cursed me with his eye. 4 times 50 living men, and I heard nor sigh nor groan. With heavy thump, a lifeless lump, they dropped down one by one. The souls did from their bodies fly, they fled to bliss or woe, and every soul it passed me by like the whiz of my crossbow. Part the 4th. I fear thee, ancient mariner, I fear thy skinny hand, and thou art long and lank and brown as is the ribbed sea-sand. I fear thee and thy glittering eye, and thy skinny hand so brown. Fear not, thou wedding guest, this body dropped not down. Alone, alone, all alone, alone on the wide, wide sea, and never a saint took pity on my soul in agony. The many men so beautiful, and they all dead did lie, and 1,000,000 slimy things lived on, and so did I. I looked upon the rotting sea, and drew my eyes away. I looked upon the rotting deck, and there the dead men lay. I looked to heaven and tried to pray, but or ever a prayer had gushed, a wicked whisper came and made my heart as dry as dust. I closed my lids and kept them close, and the balls like pulses beat, for the sky and the sea and the sea and the sky lay like a load on my weary eye, and the dead were at my feet. The cold sweat melted from their limbs, nor rot nor reek did they. The look with which they looked at me had never passed away. An orphan's curse would drag to hell a spirit from on high, but oh, more horrible than that is the curse in a dead man's eye. 7 days, 7 nights I saw that curse, and yet I could not die. The moving moon went up the sky, and nowhere did abide. Softly she was going up, and a star or two beside. Her beams bemocked the sultry main, like April hoar-frost spread. But where the ship's huge shadow lay, the charmed water burnt alway, a still and awful red. Beyond the shadow of the ship I watched the water snakes. They moved in tracks of shining white, and when they reared, the elfish light fell off in hoary flakes. Within the shadow of the ship I watched their rich attire, blue, glossy green, and velvet black. They coiled and swam, and every track was a flash of golden fire. O happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. Sure my kind saint took pity on me, and I blessed them unaware. The selfsame moment I could pray, and from my neck so free, the albatross fell off and sank like lead into the sea. This ends The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, parts 1 through 4 of 7 by Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Sea Fever by John Masefield. Coffee Break Collection 25, Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Jones, Bonita Springs, Florida. Sea Fever. I must go down to the seas again. to the lonely sea and the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by. And the wheels kick, and the wind's song, and the white sails shaking, and a gray mist on the sea's face, and a gray dawn breaking. I must go down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call, and a clear call that may not be denied. And all I ask is a windy day, with the white clouds flying, and the flung spray, and the blown spume, and the seagulls crying. I must go down to the seas again, to the vagrant gypsy life, to the gull's way and the whale's way, where the wind's like a whetted knife. And all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and a quiet sleep and a sweet dream when the long trick's over. End of Sea Fever.
Song of the Chattahoochee by Sidney Lanier. Coffee Break Collection 25. Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nemo. Song of the Chattahoochee. Out of the hills of Habersham, down the valleys of Hall, I hurry amain to reach the plain, run the rapid, and leap the fall. Split at the rock and together again, accept my bed, or narrow or wide, and flee from folly on every side, with a lover's pain, to attain the plain, far from the hills of Habersham, far from the valleys of Hall. All down the hills of Habersham, all through the valleys of Hall, the rushes cried, "Abide, abide!" The wilful waterweeds held me thrall. The laving laurel turned my tide, the ferns and the fondling grass said stay, the dewberry dipped for to work delay, and the little reed sighed, "Abide, abide, here in the hills of Habersham, here in the valleys of Hall." High o'er the hills of Habersham, veiling the valleys of Hall, the hickory told me manifold fair tales of shade, the poplar tall wrought me her shadowy self to hold. The chestnut, the oak, the walnut, the pine, overleaning with flickering meaning and sign, said, "Pass not, so cold these manifold deep shades of the hills of Habersham, these glades in the valleys of Hall." And oft in the hills of Habersham, and oft in the valleys of Hall, the white quartz shone, and the smooth brook stone did bar me of passage with friendly brawl. And many a luminous jewel lone, crystals clear or cloud with mist, ruby, garnet, and amethyst, made lures with the lights of streaming stone, in the clefts of the hills of Habersham, in the beds of the valleys of Hall. But oh, not the hills of Habersham, and oh, not the valleys of Hall, avail, I am fain for to water the plain. Downward the voices of duty call, downward to toil and be mixed with the main. The dry fields burn, and the mills are to turn, and a myriad flowers mortally yearn, and the lordly main from beyond the plain call o'er the hills of Habersham, calls through the valleys of Hall. End of Song of the Chattahoochee.
Spring Pools by Robert Frost. Coffee Break Collection 25. Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by T.J. Burns. Spring Pools. These pools that, though in forests, still reflect the total sky almost without defect, and like the flowers beside them, chill and shiver will like the flowers beside them soon be gone, and yet not out by any brook or river, but up by roots to bring dark foliage on. The trees that have it in their pent-up buds to darken nature and be summer woods, let them think twice before they use their powers to blot out and drink up and sweep away these flowery waters and these watery flowers from snow that melted only yesterday. End of Spring Pools. Recording by T.J. Burns.
I Started Early by Emily Dickinson. Coffee Break Collection 25. Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nemo. I started early. I started early, took my dog, and visited the sea. The mermaids in the basement came out to look at me, and frigates in the upper floor extended hempen hands, presuming me to be a mouse aground upon the sands. But no man moved me till the tide went past my simple shoe, and past my apron and my belt, and past my bodice too, and made as he would eat me up, as wholly as a dew, upon a dandelion sleeve, and then I started too. And he followed close behind. I felt his silver heel upon my ankle, then my shoes would overflow with pearl, until we met the solid town. No one he seemed to know, and bowing with a mighty look at me, the sea withdrew. End of I Started Early.
Down the Great River, Chapter 5, True Source of the Mississippi, by Willard W. Glazier. Coffee Break Collection 25, Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anita Slima Martinez. True Source of the Mississippi. The exhausting portages of July 21st, between the east and west forks of the Mississippi, prepared us for a sleep which even the Minnesota mosquitoes could not disturb, and which was not broken until long after the sun was glinting upon us through the trees on the morning of the 22nd. Although I had cautioned the guides to awaken me at dawn, I found them snoring lustily at 6 o'clock. As soon as all were astir, Chenawagasik and the Lagardes prepared breakfast. George struck tents and rolled the blankets, while Payne busied himself with an article for the St. Paul Pioneer Press descriptive of our voyage to Lake Itasca. But little ceremony was observed at breakfast, which was served with a due regard to our scant rations, and consisted of a small slice of bacon and a flapjack, each of very meagre dimensions. Notwithstanding the fact that we were now confronted with empty haversacks and nearly depleted cartridge boxes, my companions were still eager to follow my lead in the work of exploration beyond Itasca, which from the beginning had been the controlling incentive of our expedition, the grand objective towards which we bent all our energies. To stand at the source, to look upon the remotest rills and springs which contribute to the birth of the great river of North America. To write Finis in the volume opened by the renowned De Soto more than 300 years ago, and in which Marquette, La Salle, Hennepin, Lahontan, Carver, Pike, Beltrami, Schoolcraft, and Nicolette have successively inscribed their names, were quite enough to revive the drooping spirits of the most depressed. During our encampment on the island, Chenawagasik again reminded me that he had planted corn there many years before, and that his wigwam once stood near the spot where we had pitched our tents. He also repeated what he had told me before launching the canoes at Leech Lake, that the region about Lake Itasca was his hunting ground, and that he was thoroughly acquainted with all the rivers, lakes, and ponds within 100 miles. He further said that Paul Beaulieu was in error concerning the source of the great river, and led me to conclude that the primal reservoir was above and beyond Itasca, and that this lake was simply an expansion of the Mississippi, as are Bemidji, Cass, Winnebegoshish, Pepin, and several others. Fully convinced that the statements of Chenawagasik were entirely trustworthy, and knowing from past experience that he was perfectly reliable as a guide, we put our canoes into the water at 8 o'clock and at once began coasting Itasca for its feeders. We found the outlets of 6 small streams, 2 having well-defined mouths, and 4 filtering into the lake through bogs. The upper end of the southwestern arm is heavily margined with reeds and rushes, and it was not without considerable difficulty that we forced our way through this barrier into the larger of the 2 open streams which flow into this end of the lake. Although perfectly familiar with the topography of the country and entirely confident that he could lead us to the beautiful lake which he had so often described, Chenawagasik was for several moments greatly disturbed by the network of rushes in which we found ourselves temporarily entangled. Leaping from his canoe, he pushed the rushes right and left with his paddle, and soon, to our great delight, threw up his hands and gave a characteristic Chippewa yell, thereby signifying that he had found the object of his search. Returning, he seized the bow of my canoe and pulled it after him through the rushes out into the clear, glistening waters of the infant Mississippi, which at the point of entering Itasca is 7 feet wide and from 12 to 15 inches deep. Lusty work with our paddles for half an hour brought us to a blockade of fallen timber. Determined to float in my canoe upon the surface of the lake towards which we were paddling, I directed the guides to remove the obstructions and continued to urge the canoes rapidly forward, although opposed by a strong and constantly increasing current. Sometimes we found it necessary to lift the canoes over logs, and occasionally to remove diminutive sandbars from the bed of the stream with our paddles. As we neared the head of this primal section of the mighty river, we could readily touch both shores with our hands at the same time, while the average depth of water in the channel did not exceed 10 inches. Every paddle stroke seemed to increase the ardor with which we were carried forward. The desire to see the actual source of a river so celebrated as the Mississippi, whose mouth had been reached nearly 2 centuries before, was doubtless the impelling motive. In their eagerness to obtain the first view of the beautiful lake toward which we were paddling, and greatly annoyed by the slow progress made in the canoes, my brother and Payne stepped ashore and proposed a race to the crest of the hill which Chenawagasik told them overhung the lake. To this proposition of my companions I made objection, and insisted that all should see the goal of our expedition from the canoes. What had long been sought at last appeared suddenly. On pulling and pushing our way through a network of rushes, similar to the one encountered on leaving Itasca, the cheering sight of a transparent body of water burst upon our view. It was a beautiful lake, the source of the Father of Waters. A few moments later, and our little flotilla of 3 canoes was put in motion, headed for a small promontory which we discovered at the opposite end of the lake. We paddled slowly across one of the most pure and tranquil bodies of water of which it is possible to conceive. Not a breath of air was stirring. We halted frequently to scan its shores and to run our eyes along the verdure-covered hills which enclose its basin. These elevations are at a distance of from 3 to 4 miles and are covered chiefly with white pines intermingled with the cedar, spruce, and tamarack. The beach is fringed with the mixed foliage of the evergreen species. At one point we observed pond lilies, and at another a small quantity of wild rice. As we neared the headland, a deer was seen standing on the shore, and an eagle swept over our heads with food for its young, which we soon discovered were lodged in the top of a tall pine. The waterfowl noticed upon the lake were apparently little disturbed by our presence, and seldom left the surface of the water. This lake is about 1.5 miles in greatest diameter and would be nearly an oval in form but for a single promontory which extends its shores into the lake so as to give it in outline the appearance of a heart. Its feeders are 3 small creeks, 2 of which enter on the right and left of the headland and have their origin in springs at the foot of sand hills from 5 to 6 miles distant. The third is but little more than 1 mile in length, has no clearly defined course, and is the outlet of a small lake situated in a marsh to the southwestward. These 3 creeks were named in the order of their discovery: Eagle, Excelsior, and Deer. The small lake, which is the source of Eagle Creek, I called Alice, after my daughter. Having satisfied myself as to its remotest feeders, I called my companions into line at the foot of the promontory which overlooks the lake, and talked for a few moments of the Mississippi and its explorers, telling them that I was confident that we were looking upon the true source of the great river, and that we had completed a work begun by De Soto in 1541, and had corrected a geographical error of half a century's standing. Concluding my remarks, I requested a volley from their firearms for each member of the party in commemoration of our discovery. When the firing ceased, Payne gave me a surprise by stepping to the front and proposing that the newly discovered lake be named Glacier in honor of the leader of the expedition. The proposition was seconded by Moses Lagarde, the interpreter, and carried by acclamation, notwithstanding my protest that it should retain its Indian name, Pokegama. Much to the surprise of everyone, as we were about closing our ceremonies, Chinawagasick assumed an oratorical attitude and addressed me as follows, in a few words of true Indian eloquence. My brother, I have come with you through many lakes and rivers to the head of the Father of Waters. The shores of this lake are my hunting ground. Here I have had my wigwam and planted corn for many years. When I again roam through these forests and look on this lake, source of the great river, I will look on you. The latitude of this lake is not far from 47 degrees. Its height above the sea is an object of geographical interest, which in the absence of actual survey, it may subserve the purposes of useful inquiry to estimate. From notes taken during the ascent, it cannot be less than 3 feet above Lake Itasca. Adding the estimate of 1,575 feet submitted by Schoolcraft in 1832 as the elevation of that lake, the Mississippi may be said to originate in an altitude of 1,578 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Taking former estimates as the basis and computing them through the western fork, its length may be placed at 3,184 miles. Assuming that the barometrical height of its source is 1,578 feet, it has a mean descent of over 6 inches per mile. At Lake Bemidji, the Mississippi reaches its highest northing, which is in the neighborhood of 47 degrees. The origin of the river is an untraveled and secluded region between Leech Lake and the Red River of the North, not less than a degree of latitude south of Turtle Lake, which was for a long time supposed to be the source, removes both forks of the stream outside the usual track of the fur traders, and presents a good reason, perhaps, why its fountain head has remained so long enveloped in uncertainty. End of True Source of the Mississippi.
Water Party on the Beaulieu River in the New Forest by William Lyle Bowles. Coffee Break Collection 25. Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Schempf. Water Party on the Beaulieu River in the New Forest. I thought 'twas a toy of the fancy, a dream that leads with illusion the senses astray, and I sighed with delight as we stole down the stream, while the sun, as he smiled on her sail, seemed to say, "Rejoice in my light, ere it fade fast away." We left the loud rocking of ocean behind, and stealing along the clear current serene, The Phaedria spread her white sails to the wind, and they who divided had many a day been, gazed with added delight on the charms of the scene. Each bosom one spirit of peace seemed to feel. We heard not the tossing, the stir, and the roar of the ocean without. We heard only the keel that went whispering along the green shore, and the stroke, as it dipped, of the feathering oar. Beneath the dark woods now, as winding we go, what sounds of rich harmony burst on the ear! Hark! cheerily the loud swelling clarionets blow. Now the tones gently die, now more mellow we hear the horns through the high forest echoing clear. They cease, and no longer the echoes prolong the swell of the concert. In silence we float, in silence. Oh, listen! 'Tis woman's sweet song. The bends of the river reply to each note, and the oar is held dripping and still from the boat. Mark the sun that descends o'er the curve of the flood. Seize, Wilmot, the pencil, and instant convey to the tablet the water, the banks, and the wood, that their colors may live without change or decay when these beautiful tints die in darkness away. So when we are parted and tossed on the deep, and no longer the light of our prospect shall gleam, the semblance of one lovely scene we may keep, and remember the day and the hour, like a dream, when we sighed with delight as we stole down the stream. End of Water Party on the Beaulieu River in the New Forest.
Water Supply by Mark Twain. Coffee Break Collection 25, Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chad Horner from Liverpool. Water Supply. Mr. Clemens visited Albany on February 27th and 28th, 1901. The privileges of the floor were granted to him, and he was asked to make a short address to the Senate. Mr. President and Gentlemen, I do not know how to thank you sufficiently for this high honor which you are conferring upon me. I have for the second time now enjoyed this kind of prodigal hospitality. In the other house yesterday, today in this one. I am a modest man, and diffident about appearing before legislative bodies, and yet utterly and entirely appreciative of a courtesy like this when it is extended to me, and I thank you very much for it. If I had the privilege, which unfortunately I have not got, of suggesting things to the legislators in my individual capacity, I would so enjoy the opportunity that I would not charge anything for it at all. I would do that without a salary. I would give them the benefit of my wisdom and experience in legislative bodies, and if I could have had the privilege for a few minutes of giving advice to the other house, I should have liked to. But of course I could not undertake it, as they did not ask me to do it. But if they had only asked me, now that the House is considering a measure which is to furnish a water supply to the city of New York, why, permit me to say I live in New York myself. I know all about its ways, its desires, and its residents, and if I had the privilege, I should have urged them not to worry themselves over a measure like that to furnish water to the city of New York, for we never drink it. But I will not venture to advise this body, as I only venture to advise bodies who are not present. End of Water Supply